The notification came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night while I, Evelyn Carter, was still in my evening dress from the gala. I had kicked off my heels and was sitting on the edge of our bed, exhausted. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost ignored it, but something made me reach over and unlock the screen. It was an automated alert from the company's shareholder management system. The kind my father had set up years ago, the kind that sent real-time notices whenever shares moved above a certain threshold. My eyes moved across the words slowly. Then I read them again. A massive block of shares, shares that belonged to me, shares inherited from my late father, had been transferred out of my portfolio. The timestamp read 10:52 p.m. While I had been smiling at donors and sipping sparkling water at the foundation gala, someone had been quietly dismantling everything my father left behind. I set the phone face down on the bed. My hands were perfectly still. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply sat there, feeling something cold and quiet settle into my chest, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace but from knowing. The authorization credentials used for the transfer belonged to my husband, Aaron. Earlier that evening, Aaron had stood at the front of the ballroom, holding a champagne flute and speaking with the ease of a man who owned every room he entered. The gala was held in honor of my father's foundation, a night to celebrate his legacy in education and community development. Aaron wore his best charcoal suit. He spoke about protecting the family legacy and honoring a great man's vision. Investors clapped. Board members nodded. Old family friends dabbed their eyes. I stood near the back of the room and watched him. I remember thinking how polished he looked. How believable. I also noticed a woman I did not recognize near the far corner of the room. She was beautifully dressed, too formal for a simple guest, too relaxed for staff. A diamond bracelet caught the light on her wrist. I had seen that bracelet before. Not on her. In a receipt I found 3 months ago, buried in Aaron's car between old parking stubs, a receipt from a jewelry store, charged to a company account that had no business buying personal gifts. I looked at Aaron again. He was laughing with one of our senior board members, Mr. Osei, who quickly glanced away when my eyes landed on his face. My father, Bernard Carter, was not a loud man. He did not fill rooms with noise or chase attention. He built things quietly, a small trading business that he grew over 30 years into a respected mid-size company. He never wore expensive watches. He drove the same car for 11 years. But when he sat across from me during the last months of his life, something sharp and careful always came into his eyes. I was 29 when his illness was first diagnosed. I moved back into the family home to care for him during treatment. We spent many evenings on the back veranda, him wrapped in a blanket, me pretending I was not watching him get smaller. He talked a lot about the company during those months. He talked about loyalty and patience. One evening, he said something I did not fully understand at the time. "Evelyn, charm is the most dangerous thing in business. It makes people give away what they should protect." He paused. "I've put something in place. A protection that most people won't remember to look for." I asked him what he meant. He only smiled. "You'll know it when you need it." He passed away 4 months later in the spring. I held his hand until the nurses said it was time. After my father died, I became invisible. Not immediately. It happened gradually, the way a room slowly loses light when the sun moves. Aaron had worked at the company for 6 years by then, first as a consultant I introduced him to, later as a senior director after we married. He was good at his job. More importantly, he was good at being seen doing his job. He took meetings I was too tired to attend. He answered emails when I was managing the estate paperwork. He gave interviews when I asked for privacy during grief. The board was grateful for his steadiness. The staff liked his energy. Within 18 months of my father's passing, Aaron had become the public face of Carter Holdings, the name on the press releases, the voice in investor calls. I let it happen. People assumed I was broken by loss. They were not entirely wrong. But while they watched Aaron give press conferences, they did not notice me in my father's study at midnight, reading every document, every contract, every shareholder agreement ever signed. I was not grieving myself into emptiness. I was studying. Every single night I was studying. I found out about the affair 3 months before the gala. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had gone into Aaron's home office to leave some papers on his desk. His laptop was open. He had stepped out to take a phone call in the garden. I could see him through the window, pacing and laughing. I was not trying to spy. But the screen was open to a message thread, and the name at the top stopped me cold. Nadia. I had heard him mention her once, as a consultant brought in for a rebranding project. The messages told a different story. A much longer, much closer story. I stood there for what felt like a very long time. Then I closed his laptop carefully and walked back to my own side of the house. I sat at my desk and opened a new folder on my computer. I labeled it simply, Records. From that day forward, I documented everything. Every unusual withdrawal I noticed. Every meeting Aaron attended without telling me. Every time Mr. Osei acted strangely on calls. I printed documents. I photographed screens. I kept everything organized by date in a locked drawer. I was not acting from rage. I was acting from the one lesson my father had drilled into me. Preparation is the only real power. 6 months before the share transfer, Aaron made a significant financial mistake. He approved a rushed investment deal with an overseas logistics company that turned out to be poorly structured. The due diligence had been skipped to meet a deadline he had personally pushed for. When the deal began showing cracks, it was I who quietly worked with our legal team to restructure the terms before the damage spread to shareholders. Aaron never knew how close it had come to becoming a public scandal. I absorbed the work, smoothed the edges, and let him believe the problem had simply resolved itself. He thanked me once, briefly, over dinner. "You're good at keeping things quiet," he said. He meant it as a compliment. I smiled and refilled my glass. I later learned through an overheard conversation between Aaron and his assistant, a young man named Kofi, that Aaron had privately told someone I was too soft to fight back. That I would always choose peace over confrontation. That if it ever came down to a real battle over the company, I would simply fold. I sat with that information for a long time. Not with anger. With interest. 'Cause people who believe you will not fight back never prepare for the moment you do. I did not know Nadia well. I had only seen her twice in person before the gala, once at a company dinner, once in a photograph on Aaron's phone that he did not know I had seen. But I came to understand her influence clearly through the records I was keeping. Withdrawals from a secondary company account, one Aaron managed with limited board oversight, began appearing in larger amounts starting 8 months earlier. Hotels, flights, a luxury apartment deposit in the city center, a business registration for a lifestyle brand called NV Ventures. The registered director, Nadia Voss. What became clear piece by piece was that Aaron was not simply having an affair. He was building a future. And the materials he used to build it were taken from a foundation my father had spent his entire life constructing. I later confirmed through financial documents that Aaron had promised Nadia he would secure her business with new investment capital. He needed majority share control to push that through without full board approval. He had scheduled the share transfer for the night of the gala, when he knew I would be occupied and visible, unable to notice anything happening in the background. 3 weeks before the gala, I received a quiet knock on my office door late on a Wednesday afternoon. It was Mr. Addo, our company's head accountant, who had worked with my father for over 20 years. He was 61 years old, soft-spoken, and had always treated me with the careful respect that older colleagues sometimes show to someone they watched grow up. He sat across from me and placed a folder on my desk without speaking right away. Then he said, "Mrs. Carter, I've been watching some transactions that concern me. I've been quiet because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to cause trouble over a suspicion. But I think you need to see these." He slid the folder toward me. Inside were printed records of transactions running through a shell company registered 6 months earlier. Payments carefully distributed across small amounts to avoid triggering automatic compliance reviews. Trail, when followed, looped back to Aaron's access credentials. I thanked Mr. Addo calmly. I asked him to give me the originals and keep copies somewhere safe. I also asked him, very gently but very clearly, to say nothing to anyone until I told him it was time. He looked at me for a long moment. "Your father would be proud of how steady you are," he said quietly, and left. The whispers about me began in the weeks following my father's death and never fully stopped. I became aware of them the way you become aware of weather, not from a single moment but from a gathering heaviness in the air. People said I had not recovered well from losing him, that grief had made me fragile and unfocused, that I was too emotional to lead a company of that scale. One board member, Mr. Ease, had apparently told a colleague that I was a lovely woman but not a business mind. Aaron never corrected these opinions publicly. In fact, through messages I later reviewed, he gently encouraged them. Nothing crude, nothing direct, just small reinforcing comments. "She's been struggling. She needs space. I'm handling it for now." This slow campaign to make me appear unstable served him well. It made the board more comfortable with his leadership. It made investors see him as the company's anchor rather than me. It also set up the story he planned to tell at the shareholder meeting, that he had been managing things because I had been unable to. He planned to use my grief as a weapon against me. He had no idea I had spent that entire time turning quiet preparation into armor. I found what my father had been talking about on a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks before the gala. I was going through his private legal archive, a set of binders kept in a locked cabinet in his old study. Most documents were standard: old lease agreements, insurance records, historical share certificates. But in the third binder, held together with a rubber band, was a set of pages my father had clearly drafted himself, then had formalized through family legal counsel. It was a shareholder restriction clause. Specifically, it addressed internal family transfers and placed conditions on any movement of founding shares. One line stopped me completely. It read, "Any transfer of founding shares facilitated by a party in a position of fiduciary trust within the Carter family structure shall be rendered null and void if evidence of bad faith, financial misconduct, or betrayal of the founding shareholders' intent can be demonstrated to a qualified legal body." Clause had been embedded quietly into the original shareholder agreement during a small amendment passed 8 years ago. It had never been discussed publicly. Most board members likely did not know it existed. I read it 3 times. Then I photographed every page and sent the images to myself. The next morning I called my father's personal attorney, Mr. Yeboah, who had drafted most of his private legal arrangements. He was semi-retired but answered immediately when he heard my voice. I asked to meet in person. He came to the house that same afternoon and we sat in my father's study with the binders between us. Mr. Yeboah was quiet for a long time after I laid out what I had found and what I suspected. Then he said something that shifted the entire weight of the room. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology. I suspected something was developing over the past year. Certain questions Aaron asked about your father's estate structure, the way he probed for weaknesses without being obvious. I should have come to you sooner." He then told me something I had not known. Beyond the clause, my father had established a controlling trust for the company's founding share block, and named me as its sole stewardship authority. This meant that regardless of any surface-level transfer, the actual controlling power of those founding shares legally could not move without my direct, witnessed consent. Aaron had transferred shares on paper, but he had no idea what he had not transferred. The machinery my father built in silence was still completely intact. That same night, the night I received the share transfer notification, Aaron came to bed around 1 a.m. He moved quietly, clearly assuming I was asleep. I lay still and kept my breathing even. I heard him set his phone on his nightstand. I heard him exhale, long and slow, the exhale of a man releasing the tension of a plan finally executed. He believed in that moment that the hardest part was over, that the shares were moved, that the shareholder meeting in the morning was a formality, a stage for his announcement about the company's exciting new direction. He had probably already told Nadia it was done. He had no idea that while he lay there celebrating in the dark, every protection my father had quietly built was still standing, and that I had spent weeks making absolutely sure of that. I did not sleep that night. Not from fear. I was going over every detail one final time. The documents from Mr. Addo. Clause. The trust. Testimony Mr. Yaboa had prepared. The folder I had sent to our legal team marked, "For use, shareholder meeting 9 a.m." I went over all of it until it was perfect. Then I allowed myself one quiet breath and waited for morning. There was one piece I had not expected. It arrived 40 minutes before I left the house on the morning of the meeting. I was in my father's study, dressed and composed, reviewing my notes one final time when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "Mrs. Carter, my name is Kofi Mensah. I work as executive assistant to your husband. I need to tell you something before the meeting. I overheard a conversation 2 weeks ago between Mr. Carter and Mr. Osei. They discussed the share transfer and used the secondary approval window while oversight was lower during the gala event. I deleted an internal email from my account afterward as I was instructed, but I recovered a copy before doing so. I have it. I just know it's wrong." I read the message twice. Then I typed back 2 words, "Come now." Kofi arrived within 10 minutes, young, barely 25 and visibly nervous. He handed me a printed copy of the email and a screenshot of the deletion record. I thanked him with genuine warmth and asked if he was prepared to speak the truth if called upon that day. He swallowed once, then said, "Yes." I told him to arrive at the meeting quietly and sit near the back. The last piece had just fallen into place. What Aaron never understood, what none of them understood, was that I had not simply inherited my father's company. I had studied it. From the time I was 14, my father brought me into his world slowly and deliberately. He taught me to read a balance sheet before I could drive. He walked me through shareholder agreements the way other fathers walked their daughters through school projects. When I was in university, I spent every summer working inside the company, not as an heiress on display, but as an actual employee in operations, finance, and legal. My father believed that to truly protect something, you had to understand every thread of it. By the time he became ill, I knew Carter Holdings more deeply than any single board member or executive. Aaron had watched me step back from visibility and confused restraint with ignorance. He never asked what I did behind closed doors. He never wondered why I had never once complained about the gradual loss of my public role. He built his entire plan on a false foundation, the belief that my quietness meant emptiness. But still water runs deep. I had been preparing for this shareholder meeting not for days, but for months. In the final hours before it began, I sat at my father's desk and felt something I had not felt in a long time, total readiness. By the time I arrived at the company's headquarters, the building was already full of noise and tension. Investors had come in person, more than usual. A few members of the financial press waited near the entrance lobby, which told me someone had already hinted that something significant would be announced today. I walked through the main doors wearing a navy dress and my father's watch, a simple thing he had given me 2 years before he died. Several staff members greeted me warmly. Board members nodded, their expressions careful. I saw Mr. Osei near the elevator and watched his face go through several emotions in about 2 seconds when he saw me. I gave him a polite smile. I took the elevator alone and walked to the boardroom. The room was arranged formally, long table, name placards, water glasses already filled. I found my seat. It was toward the side. Aaron had quietly rearranged the seating chart to place himself at the center. I moved my nameplate. I placed it at my father's old chair at the very top of the table. Then I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. Aaron arrived 12 minutes later, talking loudly and smiling. When he saw me in that chair, his smile flickered. Aaron opened the meeting with the confidence of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. He stood at the front and spoke about growth, vision, and the future of Carter Holdings under renewed leadership. He used the word "we" often but gestured mostly at himself. He presented polished, well-designed slides showing new strategic directions, a proposed partnership with an external investment group, and projected revenue increases. Several newer board members leaned forward with interest. 2 investors from the back were taking notes. It was a good performance. He had clearly rehearsed it. He spoke for nearly 22 minutes. When he finished, a polite wave of appreciation moved across the room. He smiled, easy, warm, satisfied, and said, "Before we move to the vote, does anyone have questions?" He looked around with the comfortable air of a man expecting applause, not challenges. His eyes passed over me briefly. I had said nothing yet. I had not moved. I simply sat in my father's chair with my hands flat on the table and waited for the small silence that follows a question no one expects to be answered. Then I raised my hand. "I have one question," I said. My voice was calm. The room shifted, a physical change in attention like a current moving through water. Aaron's expression adjusted into something patient and slightly condescending, the look of a man preparing to manage a minor interruption. "Of course, Evelyn," he said. I opened the folder in front of me. "The share transfer logged at 10:52 p.m. last night. Could you walk the board through the authorization chain for that transaction?" Temperature in the room changed. Visibly. 2 board members exchanged glances. One investor stopped writing. Aaron's smile did not break immediately, but something behind his eyes went very still. "That's an internal matter that can be addressed after. It's a founding share transfer," I said gently. "Which makes it a shareholder matter." "I'm sure the board would agree." Several heads nodded. Aaron paused. "The transfer was a strategic reallocation, authorized using your personal credentials," I said. "At 10:52 p.m., while you were delivering remarks at my father's foundation gala." I slid the first document forward. Then the second. Then the recovered email, Kofi's copy, printed and clean. I watched the color begin to leave Aaron's face as the documents moved around the table. What followed was not a dramatic explosion. It was something quieter and more devastating, the sound of a carefully built story coming apart, one thread at a time. As the documents circulated, our legal counsel, Ms. Alma Darko, who had been seated quietly near the far wall, stood and formally presented the financial audit trail. What it showed was not just the share transfer. It showed 18 months of irregular withdrawals through a secondary company account. It showed payments to NV Ventures, a company registered by Nadia Voss, with direct deposits matching dates of unauthorized account activity. It showed the rebranding project fees, hotel charges, and the luxury apartment deposit. It showed that company funds had financed a private venture with no connection to Carter Holdings whatsoever. One of the senior investors, a silver-haired man named Mr. Blankson who had known my father personally, removed his glasses and set them on the table. "Aaron," he said very quietly, "tell me this is not what it looks like." Aaron said nothing. His silence was its own kind of answer. And in that silence I watched the room make its decision. Mr. Yaboa stood next. He was composed and precise, a man who had spent 4 decades in corporate law and did not use unnecessary words. He presented the founding share restriction clause, its origins, its legal standing, and the conditions under which it activated. He then stated clearly and formally that based on the evidence presented, those conditions had been met, and that the share transfer logged the previous night was, under the original shareholder agreement, legally null and void. The room was absolutely silent. Aaron's legal representative, a younger attorney who had come prepared for a routine meeting, was visibly reading his own copy of the clause for the first time. I watched him read it twice. Then I watched him close the folder and say nothing because there was nothing to say. Aaron tried once more, a single sharp attempt at authority. "This is a legal overreach." The transfer was properly executed under. Mr. Yeboah raised one hand, the way a teacher stops a student mid-sentence. The transfer was executed under fraudulent authorization, using credentials maintained in a position of fiduciary trust. The clause is unambiguous. He set his copy on the table. The transfer is void. The shares remain with Evelyn Carter. I had asked Kofi to sit near the back of the room and wait for Mr. Yeboah to finish. When the room settled into its stunned quiet, I turned and said his name. He stood. He was still nervous. I could see it in the way he held his folder too tightly, but his voice was clear and steady. He explained that he had been present during a conversation between Aaron and Mr. Osei 2 weeks before the gala. He described what he overheard, the plan to use the secondary approval window to execute the transfer while authorization oversight was lower during the gala event. He confirmed he had been asked to delete an internal email, and he confirmed that he had recovered a copy before doing so, which was now in the board's hands. When he finished, the room turned to Mr. Osei. The board member sat very still for a long moment. Then he said quietly that he wanted to speak with legal counsel before saying anything further. Everyone understood that this was not a denial. Aaron's 3 closest allies on the board, men who had been nodding enthusiastically through his presentation less than an hour ago, each found reasons to study the papers in front of them rather than meet his eyes. The alliance had lasted exactly as long as it was safe. Not one moment longer. I had thought until the night before the meeting that Aaron's betrayal ended with the shares and the affair. I was wrong. As the legal review widened during the session, Ms. Darko presented one final set of documents I had only received the previous evening, a discovery that came from digging further into the Foundation's asset filings. Aaron had, in the weeks before the gala, quietly initiated a process to restructure the Carter Family Foundation's asset control. Plan was to move the Foundation's property holdings and endowment reserves under an external management structure, a trust operated by a firm with direct ties to NV Ventures. In other words, he had not just been moving company shares. He had been preparing to move my father's charitable legacy, the schools funded, the clinics supported, the community programs my father had poured his final years into a structure ultimately controlled by Nadia and the life Aaron was building with her. Even Mr. Blankson, who had kept himself composed through everything else, said quietly, "That is unconscionable." Several people around the table nodded. I felt something tighten in my chest, not surprise but a deep personal grief that this was the shape of the man I had trusted with the things I loved most. What Aaron could never have predicted was that I had begun preparing contingency protections 8 weeks before the meeting. Working closely with Mr. Yeboah and Ms. Darko, I had taken several quiet legal steps. Controlling trust for the founding shares had been formally reaffirmed with updated documentation, closing the access gap Aaron had attempted to exploit. The Foundation's asset control structure had been reviewed and a board resolution quietly passed, with a quorum of loyal members, requiring dual authorization for any restructuring of its assets. I had also filed a precautionary note with our corporate registrar flagging the secondary account for compliance review, meaning any further withdrawals would now trigger immediate escalation. I revealed these protections one by one, not triumphantly but clearly. I wanted the board to understand that Carter Holdings had not merely survived an attack. It had never been as exposed as Aaron believed. My father had built protections into the company's foundation. I had built protections around those protections. At one point, Mr. Blankson looked at me across the table and said, "Bernard always said you were the most prepared person he knew." He paused. I understand what he meant now. The board vote to remove Aaron as senior director was unanimous. Took less than 4 minutes. He sat in his chair during the vote and said nothing. His attorney had already advised him, in a whispered conversation the entire room could sense, to stop speaking. The resolution also triggered an immediate handover of all company credentials, access cards, and communication accounts. Security was called, not dramatically or aggressively but formally and efficiently, as my father would have wanted. Aaron stood when they arrived. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me once, just once, with an expression I cannot easily describe. It was not rage and not sadness. It was something emptier than either, the look of a man finally confronting the distance between who he believed he was and who he had actually been. I did not look away. I held his gaze steadily until he turned and walked to the door. Two people near the back of the room began speaking in low tones. The financial press representatives lingering in the lobby were, by now, clearly aware that the story they had come for was not the one Aaron had intended to give them. I sat still in my father's chair as the room reorganized itself around a new reality. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and clear and ready. That evening, I went back to the boardroom alone. Everyone had gone. The water glasses had been cleared. The documents were stacked neatly to one side. I sat in my father's chair in the quiet and stayed with the question I had been carrying since the share transfer alert lit up my phone the night before. What did I want? Not what I was owed. Not what justice demanded. What did I, Evelyn Carter, want for the rest of my life? Aaron had already been referred to the company's legal team and an external compliance body for full investigation. The foundation assets were protected. The shares were intact. The board had formally asked me to step into the leadership role, not as a temporary measure but as the permanent rightful head of Carter Holdings. I said I would give them my answer in 48 hours. In the quiet of that empty boardroom, I decided I would not spend my energy trying to destroy Aaron. The legal process would unfold as it needed to. My role was not revenge. My role was the company, the people who worked in it, the communities my father had cared for, the future that still needed building. I would choose accountability over cruelty, legacy over bitterness. I would lead, not in my father's shadow or in reaction to my husband's betrayal, but entirely as myself. 6 months later, I sat at my father's desk, my desk now, on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Inside, the company was moving. Meetings running. Calls happening. People doing their work with the steadiness of an organization that had come through something difficult and found its footing. The legal proceedings against Aaron and Mr. Osei were progressing through the proper channels. Envy Ventures had dissolved. The foundation was flourishing under a restructured board with full transparency protocols in place. 3 new community programs had launched since the beginning of the year. The Morning Post included a thick envelope I had been expecting from Mr. Yaboa's office. Inside was a letter, sealed with a small sticker that simply read, "To be opened when you are ready." My father had written it years earlier. Mr. Yaboa explained in his covering note that Bernard Carter had given it to him with instructions to deliver it to me after the storm. I opened it slowly. My father's handwriting filled one page, careful and even the way he did everything. He wrote about watching me grow up, about the pride he carried quietly because he never knew how to say it loudly enough. The very bottom, in the last line, he wrote, "You were always meant to lead after the storm, Evelyn. Not because I built this for you, but because you were always strong enough to build it for yourself." I folded the letter carefully. I held it against my chest for a long moment. Then I placed it in the top drawer of my desk, picked up the phone, and got back to work.